Hello, everyone. Hey, it's Steve Van Tassel coming at you for Dynasty Owner. How's it going today? I am here again, and we're talking about our 2021 Dynasty Owner startup drafts. Those of you new to Dynasty Owner, hopefully you're going to be doing a startup draft in 2021. And for those of you returning, maybe you're adding a second team and you're going to do another draft this year. And I'm here to help you figure out who you want on your team. Last week we looked at guys who are affordable first-round draft picks, and now we're going to take a look at guys who should be a no-round draft pick. That's right. We're talking about players you want to avoid drafting in 2021 in your Dynasty Owner League. As we all know, Dynasty Owner is different than a regular fantasy league. For your first-round picks aren't necessarily the guys who are going to get you the most points, but they are sometimes those guys who are going to get you a lot of points, but for an affordable salary. And so, at the opposite end of the spectrum, we've got guys who you don't want to draft. These are guys who aren't going to produce too many points and have really high salaries. Those are the guys who you're going to avoid. I mean, in a regular dynasty league, it might be okay to have them, regular dynasty league or a redraft league, it might be fine to have those guys. They don't produce that much, but they'll help you on a week when you need them, and they're okay. But in a Dynasty Owner, you can't afford to clog up your team with a guy who makes way too much money and doesn't produce the points. It sits on your bench or on your practice squad. That's just not going to help your team to win. So who are these players who I recommend not drafting in 2021? Well, let's first look back at 2020 and see who the type of player that we're talking about. So last year in 2020, a guy who wasn't worth drafting in Dynasty Owner was A.J. Green. A.J. Green ended up as the number 183 ranked player in Dynasty Owner. He produced only 111.3 Dynasty Owner fantasy points, and that was playing all 16 games. People drafted him in general in like the 14th, 15th round. His ADP was 173.8. And so if you're in a regular dynasty league or a redraft league, that's not too bad. You drafted him 173 and he played at the 183 level. So it's not too bad. You got kind of average value, fair value. But in Dynasty Owner, A.J. Green was a terrible value last year. I mean, and that's because his salary is almost $18 million a year. It was $17.97 million a year. So you're getting that level of production around 7 points a game for almost $18 million of your salary cap. If you need a wide receiver to produce that kind of level of points for you last year, a better option would have been Josh Reynolds of the Los Angeles Rams. I mean, he had similar production and he only cost you $762,000. And you could have got him a little later too. He was generally going about 3 rounds later. His ADP was 210.3. So that's somebody who you could have got instead. So that's why A.J. Green should not have been drafted in Dynasty Owner, because you could have got the same production from a Josh Reynolds for $17 million less. So now let's look at those players who I'm not drafting in 2021 Dynasty Owner startup drafts, and I recommend nobody draft in these startup drafts. And the first player, sorry to all you Cleveland Browns fans out there, it's OBJ, Odell Beckham Jr. I mean, his salary is $18 million a year, and he's got 3 more years left at that salary level. I know he got hurt last year. He was doing pretty well before then, but he was still only producing about 14.5 Dynasty Owner fantasy points per game. So if he had done that over the whole course of the season, he would have projected as the number 16 ranked wide receiver, which is good, but not great when you're paying him top dollar. I mean, he was the number 6. He right now is scheduled to be the 6th, tied with Tyreek Hill, to be the 6th highest paid wide receiver in Dynasty Owner. So he's great. He's fine. He did well, but he's not really worth the money. So, for example, if you wanted similar level of production to what OBJ produced for you last year, you could have drafted Marvin Jones of the Detroit Lions. And you would have gotten Marvin Jones for only $8 million a year, and you would have had $10 million left to put towards other players to help your team win. So that's why OBJ, it's $18 million a year. He's not very productive. He hasn't played a lot recently. He hasn't played a full season. 4 of his 7 seasons, he's played 12 games or less. and it's $18 million a year, and it's 3 more years. So OBJ is number 1 on my avoid draft board. Number 2, sorry, he's another Cleveland Brown. It's tight end Austin Hooper. Hooper, I mean, last year he was the second highest paid tight end at $10.5 million a year. And now with Travis Kelce and George Kittle getting new contracts that have pushed them above him, he's going to be, right now, if the season started today, he'd be the 3rd highest paid tight end. And for $10.5 million, you got the same level of production over the course of the season as Gerald Everett of the LA Rams and Anthony Ferkser of the Tennessee Titans. And you could have got Everett for a little over $1.5 million a year, and Ferkser for $660,000, a lot cheaper than Austin Hooper. And I know what some of you are saying. He had a bad year. He was hurt. He produced when he was with Atlanta the year before, and that's fine. But there's a tight end out there who pretty much was about as productive the last couple of years as Hooper, but is only $1.4 million in salary, and that tight end is Dallas Goedert of the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, you could get Goedert and get roughly the same production as you get from Hooper and save $9 million a year. So that's why I'm not drafting Austin Hooper. I'm avoiding him at all costs in Dynasty Owner. Number 3 is our first non-Cleveland Brown player, and it's Sterling Shepard, wide receiver for the New York Giants. I mean, Shepard's among a group of about 5 wide receivers who make around $10 million a year. You've got Tyler Boyd, who makes $10.75 million a year. You got Tyler Lockett and Shepard, who both make $10.25 million a year. You got Robbie Anderson at $10 million a year, and you got Jamison Crowder at $9.5 million a year. So out of those 5 players, you kind of want, if you're going to pay $10 million for a wide receiver, you want the most production you can get out of that your roughly $10 million wide receiver. And out of those 5 guys, Shepard's the worst. He averaged only 11.4 Dynasty Owner fantasy points per game last year, which is lower than Lockett, who had 17.7, Crowder, who had 15.1, Boyd, who had 15, and Anderson, who had 14.8. And out of those players, Shepard also played the fewest number of games. He only played 8, tied with Crowder, who also only played 8. And Shepard's production has been pretty similar for his whole entire career. In 2020, he averaged he had 162.5 Dynasty Owner fantasy points. In 2019, he played 10 games and had 141.8. And he averaged in previous years, in 2018, using the Dynasty Owner scoring system, since Dynasty Owner wasn't around then, in 2018, he would have averaged 11.4 Dynasty Owner fantasy points per game. In 2017, he would have averaged 12.9. And in 2016, his rookie year, he would have averaged 11.5. So what we're talking about is over the course of about 5 years, Sterling Shepard's getting you 12 to 14 points a game, roughly. So if he plays all 16 games, you're talking about that's roughly a low-end wide receiver number 2, a high-end wide receiver number 3. Fine, but not great for $10 million a year. Now, he doesn't play all 16 games generally. He's been averaging about 13 games a season for the past 5 years. So you take that down, and all of a sudden he's a wide receiver 3 or a wide receiver 4. And for $10 million a year, I need my wide receivers to be more productive than that. There's 4 other guys out there who you could get instead of Shepard. And, I mean, for a wide receiver 3 or a wide receiver 4, somebody who's probably sitting on your bench, you don't really want $10 million sitting on your bench in Dynasty Owner. So that's why I would avoid drafting Sterling Shepard. We're going to stay in the New York metropolitan area for our number 4 player. It's Sam Darnold of the New York Jets. I mean, Sam's contract isn't bad. He's the 25th highest paid quarterback out there because he's still on his rookie deal. So, I mean, it's not terrible to have a low salary quarterback there, but there's a lot of low salary quarterbacks out there, and almost all of them are better than Sam. He was terrible last year. I mean, in looking at his production last year, I noticed that his highest scoring week was 25.9 Dynasty Owner fantasy points. He had that in week 4 against Denver. But if you look at the other quarterbacks, we find that there were 10 quarterbacks who averaged more than that per game. So basically, Darnold's best week was not as good as the average for the top 10 quarterbacks out there. And I know those guys make more money, but that's why you save your money by not getting guys like Darnold and the other guys we've talked about, so you can pay those quarterbacks that kind of money. So, and you're like, well, I need a cheap quarterback. I can't afford 2 or 3 high salary quarterbacks. Another guy out there who's exactly $8 million, so he's a little bit more than Darnold. He's $44,000 more, is Nick Foles of the Chicago Bears. I mean, Foles is kind of in the same spot as Darnold. Maybe start, maybe not. Who knows? Depends on what happens. But if he plays and he costs you the same amount of salary, you're going to get more production from Foles. Foles last year averaged 17.1 Dynasty Owner fantasy points per game compared to the 13.2 you got from Darnold. So if I need a quarterback in that under $10 million salary range and all the other ones have gone pretty quickly, I would rather wait a while and draft Foles rather than get Darnold. So number 5, we've got a tie for number 5. We've got a 5A and a 5B because we've got David and Duke Johnson from the Houston Texans. The Johnson brothers, even though they're not related, they both play for Houston and they play the same position. We'll take David first because he's the starter and he's got the bigger salary. David Johnson last year was the second highest paid running back in Dynasty Owner. He was $13 million a year, and he was second behind Ezekiel Elliott, who was $15 million a year. And with a lot of running backs got paid during the season, and their new salaries will kick in 2021. But even with all those kicking in, he's still going to be the third highest paid running back next year. At $13 million a year, he's going to be the fourth highest paid running back. He's behind Christian McCaffrey, Elliott, and Alvin Kamara. But there's guys who got new salaries who are younger and better who are going to make less than his $13 million a year. You got Dalvin Cook, who's making $12.6 million. Derrick Henry, $12.5 million. Joe Mixon, $12 million. So the only good part about Johnson is that his salary is only for one more year. But do you really want to pay that money when you could find cheaper running backs who give you the same level of production? A guy who gave you the same level of production as David Johnson did last year is Chase Edmonds of the Arizona Cardinals. And he's only going to cost you $728,000 a year next year. So that's why I'm avoiding David Johnson. And I'm also avoiding his backup, Duke Johnson, who also has 1 year left on his contract, but that contract is for $5.3 million, which is a lot to pay for a backup running back, first of all. But if you need a backup, you need running backs. Everybody needs running backs. They get injured. They don't play. You need a bunch of running backs. But you've got to be smart with the money you spend on your running backs. So if you're going to pay for a backup running back, a guy who's not going to be a starter, and he's not going to be a starter, but could play in a pinch or pick up some points for you, the guy I would get is Latavius Murray of the New Orleans Saints. Murray makes $3.6 million a year, so you're already saving $1.7 million over what you get from Duke Johnson, and you get roughly the same level of production. And I know what people are saying, Duke doesn't get the chance. He catches passes. He could be good if he had the full-time job, if he played more. Well, when he had the starting job for 4 games when David Johnson was out, he averaged 8.95 Dynasty Owner fantasy points per game. So when he had the chance, he didn't produce. I don't want him. I'd rather have Murray. Finally, we've got everybody. We've got the last player who I'm avoiding in Dynasty Owner drafts this year, and everybody's favorite position, kicker. So, I mean, I know you need a kicker. Everybody needs a kicker. You probably need 2. I think you should have 3 for bye weeks and stuff. But you don't need to pay millions of dollars for your kicker. And in fact, this one kicker who I'm telling you to avoid, you'd have to pay him $3.86 million a year. And he's signed through the 2024 season. So you're paying him for 4 more seasons on your Dynasty Owner salary cap. And that guy's Jake Elliott of the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, he got paid $3.86 million last year, which ranked him 11th on the kicker scale. There's a bunch of guys who make a little bit more. Justin Tucker's the highest at $5 million, and then there's a lot in the $4 million range. But he might be the 11th highest paid kicker, but he was the 30th ranked kicker in Dynasty Owner last year. I mean, he only scored for you 54 Dynasty Owner fantasy points last year in all 16 games, an average of about 3.2 points a game. So a comparable player who also scored 54 Dynasty Owner fantasy points is Matt Gay of the LA Rams. If you drafted Gay, he was on Tampa Bay and then he got released. But if you held on to him, then he found his way to LA and scored 54 Dynasty Owner fantasy points. But he did so in only 7 games. And he also did so for a salary of $711,000, which is a little over $3 million less than you would have spent on Elliott for the same level of production. And so we'll get into this later, but the reason why I won't want to pay for Elliott is kickers are cheap. They should be cheap. Out of the top 10 kickers last year in Dynasty Owner, 6 of them made less than $1 million a year. So you don't really need to go out there and pay almost $4 million for a bad kicker. So that's why I'm avoiding Jake Elliott at all costs in 2021. So is there anybody else? So now that's my list, or that's as many as I could do in this segment. So tell me who's on your list. Is there any guys you're not going to draft in Dynasty Owner in 2021? Drop them in the chat here on YouTube. Send me a tweet. My Twitter is right there. It's at SteveVT33. Tell me who you're not drafting, who's terrible, who you don't think is worth the money that they're going to get paid and stuff like that. Thanks for watching the video. Be sure to like the video. Be sure to read the article to get more in-depth information about the players I've just gone over and other reasons why I'm not drafting them. And be sure to watch the videos and read the articles from all the rest of the Dynasty Owner crew of writers. We've got Nate Christian on Mondays. He breaks down rookies in his prospect preview. On Wednesdays, we got Matt the Jerk, who does a deep dive into contracts by team on Wednesdays. If you're in a rebuild for a Dynasty Owner, Jay Pounds is here to help you on Thursdays, where he goes over his articles and videos on how to rebuild your roster, your Dynasty Owner roster. So please watch all those videos, like them all on YouTube, read the articles, follow all of us on Twitter, and follow Dynasty_Owner on Twitter as well. And I'll be back next week with another video to help you with your 2021 Dynasty Owner startup team. Thanks a lot. Have a good day. Bye.